Hello everyone, and welcome to this segment of our board candidate video program to talk about school laws and ethics. And with us for that discussion is Susan Goldammer, a staff attorney with the Missouri School Boards Association, and Mike Reed, our Associate Executive Director for Advocacy for MSBA. And we thank both of you for being with us. And Susan, let's start with you if we could. We exist in public education in a pretty regulated environment, don't we? And there are lots of school laws that our board candidates need to be aware of.
Yes. In fact, school law or education law is one of the largest growth areas in the legal world because there is so much regulation on the state and federal level of education. So we do encourage school districts to have an attorney. They don't have to be on retainer, but they need to have access to regular legal advice.
Mm-hmm. And one of the important laws our candidates need to be aware of, Susan, is the Sunshine Law here in Missouri. And that's important because school board members are public officials and for the most part need to conduct their business in the open, don't they?
That's correct. We have a state law. Actually, all states have some form of the Sunshine Law. Or the Open Meetings and Records Law, it's also known as. And the theory behind the Sunshine Law is that there will be less corruption in government if there's transparency. And so the basic rules of the Missouri Sunshine Law or the Missouri Open Meetings and Records Law is that public meetings are open to the public. They don't get to participate, but they get to view, to watch, to listen in, to see how their elected officials vote. And records of the school district are open to the public.
Mm-hmm. But a lot of school boards do allow public participation, even though that's not necessarily required. Is that right?
That's correct. That's by local board policy. Many districts have decided that they would like to hear from the public in some format, allow for members of the public to either ask to be on the agenda, or some districts have what I call open mic time, which is just an opportunity for members of the public to come and maybe for 2 or 3 minutes state praise or concern about certain items. But that is completely up to the local Board of Education if they want to allow that. The Sunshine Law does not require that.
Mm-hmm. So, Susan, is it fair to say the vast majority of business conducted by a school board would be in open session?
Yes, that's true. However, the Sunshine Law, whenever there's a law, there's exceptions, and the Missouri Sunshine Law is no different. There are 21 exceptions in the law, topics that school board members may discuss in closed session or records that the school district does not have to provide to the public. And pretty logical reasons for doing so. Legal advice, for example. School boards that are concerned they might be sued, may have violated the law, or are seeking legal advice from an attorney, that can be closed and confidential because, as anyone who hires an attorney, that is a confidential discussion. So that can be in closed session. When we're dealing with student records or students' graduations, so disciplinary hearings, those kinds of things, that's in closed session because we have both state and federal laws that protect the confidentiality of student records and anything that has to do with an individual student. Performance evaluations for employees. No one would work for a school district if their performance evaluations were conducted on the town square, and so those kinds of things can be done in closed session. Decisions on whether to hire or terminate somebody can be done in closed session. Discussions about purchasing, if we're negotiating a contract, those kinds of things can be done in closed session until the contract is signed. The law is pretty strict. Once we spend public dollars, the public gets to know about how we spend those dollars.
And Susan, it's important for our board candidates to know that should they be elected to their board and they have closed session discussions, that those discussions remain confidential.
Yes. There's I tell school boards when we do training, and of course anyone who gets elected is going to receive extensive training on the Sunshine Law. This is the law that we get the most questions about, and there is actually some individual liability if you willfully refuse to follow the Sunshine Law. But the Sunshine Law, the board can hold everything in open if they want. The Sunshine Law doesn't require boards to discuss things in closed session. You won't violate the Sunshine Law, but you'll violate a lot of other laws. There's reasons why the legislature, and we have a pretty conservative legislature when it comes to the Sunshine Law, the assumption is that everything is done in open. But there are good reasons for these exceptions, and they typically mean that there can be legal liability either for the individual board member or for the school district if those topics aren't discussed in confidence. And I tell my new board members in particular, the hardest thing you're going to have to do is not share information that you receive in closed session with other persons, and think of 10 very nice ways when somebody asks you, well, what happened with Johnny? We think he got suspended. Think of about 10 nice ways of saying, I know that you're really interested in this, but I just can't share this with you, and I'm sure if it was your child, you'd understand as well.
Another issue that comes up quite a bit, Susan, with our board candidates is nepotism and having relatives or spouses perhaps employed with the school district, something that's not uncommon in the state of Missouri. But what are the rules on nepotism?
Well, nepotism is actually created in the Missouri Constitution, and the Missouri Constitution says that public officials cannot participate in a vote to employ or appoint a relative within 4 degrees. Okay, so that it's very limited to a motion to employ or appoint a relative within 4 degrees of blood or marriage. So we have, school districts employ a lot of relatives of school board members. I think at one point in time we estimated maybe a quarter of school board members are related to somebody in their school district. And so it's not illegal for the district to employ your relative. You can't participate in the vote. And I think this is particularly important for our new candidates because school districts do a lot of hiring in April, May, and June. And so you might get elected and get on the school board, and maybe the first vote you ever take is to employ somebody. And if you are related to that person by blood or marriage within 4 degrees, you must abstain. You absolutely must abstain. If you don't, the consequence is that you forfeit your seat. And the law is very strict on this, even accidentally. I've had lots of board members that, in consent agendas, a lot of districts will hire employees on a consent agenda, and so they'll be given a stack of papers, one of which is a long list of employees, and the board member doesn't read the list very closely and realize that cousin Joe applied for a job, votes on the list in general, and commits nepotism, and they lose their seats. And I've had, unfortunately, every year we have school board members that have to resign because they accidentally committed nepotism. So I guess my best advice to our candidates is if you get elected, for goodness sakes, read those lists very carefully and make sure that you abstain before you vote to employ or appoint a relative within these 4 degrees.
Susan, on this program, we're just scratching the surface, of course,
yes.
on the many legal issues that school boards have to deal with. And you mentioned this earlier, but school boards do have to rely on legal counsel frequently on issues, don't they?
Absolutely, absolutely. And one of the services the Missouri School Boards Association provides its member districts is we do have a legal hotline, because we know that school board members, the night of the meeting, have questions. And so we do encourage our member districts to call us and let's get some of these things resolved. And then most districts also have a private attorney that they rely on as well.
All right. Mike Reed, let's turn to some of the rules, regulations, and laws that our candidates need to know while they are candidates. Can you give us an overview about some election rules and regulations?
Well, certainly. First of all, a candidate needs to know whether or not he's going to spend any money during this election. If he spends no money, there's no harm, no foul. But if the candidate decides to spend money, he then must determine whether he's going to spend more than $1,000 or less than $1,000, nor take more than $325 from any one individual. If they take more than $325 from one individual or spend more than $1,000, they must form a committee. A committee is very easy. A committee can be 1 or 2 or 3 people. You open a bank account, run all of the money through that, file your papers with the county election official, usually the county clerk, that must be filed on certain days. There must be, and those days will be shown on on the screen right before us right now. The reports must be done. And you must file your committee and must make a determination at least 30 days prior to the election. If you decide less than 30 days before the election you want to spend money, you have to spend only your own money, and you cannot form a committee. Sounds a little complicated. We have some policies online that you can read to see what the law is. But a committee is very easy. You run all the money through, you report who gave you the money and where did it go. If you spend less than $1,000, then no committee is necessary and you run on an exemption. But it's extremely important. The laws in Missouri state that it's a reporting state. Who gives you the money and where does it go?
And where do they file these reports, Mike?
With the county clerk, the county election authority. One of the biggest things that candidates must remember that when they have an election, if they put any printed material out, they must say who paid for that printed material. If it's the candidate alone using his own money, not running it through committee, it's appropriate to say paid for by Joe Jones. If it is run through a committee, it must say paid for by the name of the committee and the committee's treasurer. Very simple, but that's probably the most frequented question asked the Missouri Ethics Commission, and complaints are filed more on that than any other thing at the Missouri Ethics Commission.
Now, Mike, are there limits on the campaign contributions a candidate might be able to receive?
No, he can take as much money as he wants from anyone and from any place. He just must report it. If he has a campaign committee, he must report who gave it and how did it go. If, in fact, the candidate gets a contribution of more than $5,000 from any one individual, he must report that within 48 hours to the Missouri Ethics Commission. Doesn't happen very often in school board elections, happens a lot in other elections. But if, in fact, Uncle Joe wants to give you $6,000 to run, you have to have your committee and you have to let the Ethics Commission know within 48 hours.
So are there penalties for not filing these reports?
Yes, there are. There are financial penalties for not filing the reports. And you cannot, if you have a committee, you have to file the last report before being sworn into office.
Now, Mike, once a candidate is elected to the school board, are there certain requirements as far as disclosure and reporting things?
Well, perhaps. The Missouri Ethics Commission and the Missouri Ethics Law requires that personal financial disclosure reports be filed by certain political subdivisions. We are required to hand each candidate a statement that says, do you have a business relationship with the political subdivision? Most schools have adopted their own method of disclosing conflicts of interest, and when that happens, all candidates don't have to, only if in fact you have a business relationship or have done more than $500 at any one time with the school district. So look at it, see where you are. If you have questions, ask your attorney or call the Missouri Ethics Commission and ask whether or not this has to be filed.
What I tell school districts is candidates have an obligation to at least look and determine whether they have to file a personal financial disclosure. But once you're elected, once a year, you also have to think about it. Do I need to file this personal financial disclosure form? And it depends on your district and the rules of the district whether or not you have to do or not. And so, but there is a continuing obligation.
There's a continuing obligation. And most districts adopt their own method every year. But again, that's up to the district, and board members should discuss that with the superintendent on a yearly basis.
Susan, what about conflicts of interest in general? I know we get questions about that from time to time, and what constitutes a conflict of interest. Do our candidates need to be worried about that?
Well, yes. There are some very strict laws about when can you vote on certain matters, particularly if it involves yourself, your spouse, your dependent children, or businesses that you own. And there, in particular, if a school candidate or a school board member owns a business or their spouse owns a business that does business with the school district, it's very important that they learn these laws. If they do business that exceeds $500 per transaction or $5,000 per year, the business will need to be bid, and the board members' bid will need to be the absolute lowest received. And if your district is located in a first-class county, board members cannot sell things to the school district, can't sell products for example, to the school district. That's a very old law. It's actually a crime if they do that. And so there are some, if you own a business and you are doing business with the school district, it's worth learning a little bit more about the conflict of interest laws to see if that's going to impact the business that you own.
All right, Susan Goldammer and Mike Reed, thanks for being with us. We really appreciate your insights into school laws and ethical issues facing our school board candidates. Thanks a lot.
Thank
Thank you.